This is Valante. Thank you for joining me. Today, my guest is Jessica Oladapo. She is an anti-oppression trainer, and she's also a professor at Rock Valley College. Welcome, Jessica. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad you're here. Okay, so tell me, what exactly is an anti-oppression trainer?
I like to bill myself as an anti-oppression trainer. It's kind of a fancy term for diversity trainer. I personally don't like the term diversity. And so anti-oppression is more inclusive, right? So we are focused on race, of course. That's generally the focus. But also gender, social class, so wealth versus not, um, sexual orientation, immigrant status. So I'm concerned with all of these pieces of diversity and the way in which we're able to be an ally for each group. It is my personal belief that if I am an ally for race, then that forces me to also be an ally for the LGBTQ community and for women, for all the minority groups or all the groups that might experience disadvantage.
Now, there are two terms that are always thrown around:
Mm-hmm.
diversity
Mm-hmm.
and inclusion. And I feel like there's not a clear or concise definition of either term that's universal.
Right.
So, can you kind of share definitions of diversity and inclusion for us?
Absolutely. So my favorite example, my favorite explanation of the difference is diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance while you're there, right? So with diversity, I might be in the room, but I probably don't have an active role in the decision making process. With inclusion, I'm not only in the room, but I'm also sitting at the table. So I have agency. I'm able to take an active role in the decision making process. My views and opinions are represented in the whole entire group, whether that is a school district or a police department or a college and university or the whole entire society, right? Inclusion means that I am actually active and seen and valued within this community.
Now, I noticed something when you were talking about the whole diversity and oppression and change and inclusion. You named a whole list
Yeah.
of interest groups. Now, for a long time, we really only focused on race and
Right.
women. So, can you describe for me the environment or the what it's like to actually include or make all of those diverse groups a part of your
Right.
advocacy?
To make them
Ish,
visible.
yeah.
It's really, for me, it's really important.
Okay.
I think that we all contribute to diversity. We all contribute to a diverse society. Um, and so when we understand how our own diversity impacts our identity, so my intersectional identity as I'm black, I'm a woman, I'm heterosexual, I'm a single mom. So I'm all of these things,
Mm-hmm.
and that contributes to the diverse world. However, I also have some privilege, some class privilege. I'm a college professor, I'm the chair of my department, I have degrees from um, very highly prestigious schools. That gives me kind of a leg up, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it gives me a leg up to actually have these conversations. But when I'm having these conversations, I'm able to touch people and ask them to think about the ways in which they might be disadvantaged. So women in the society are disadvantaged. But then on the flip side, what privileges do you have as well? So when we include all of these groups, it opens up the conversation. So people are able to really think about their own identities. And my hope is that once they think about their own identities, whether it is a privilege or a way in which they might experience disadvantage, they will then have empathy for the other groups as well.
Wow, now that's a very interesting perspective you just added because most people can readily identify their disadvantage.
Right.
And a lot of times will ignore or overlook or be not aware or be unaware of their privilege.
Right.
And I think that no matter what it is, there is a privilege
Mm-hmm.
or benefit to being whatever it is that you are.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
What process do you use to help someone identify their privilege? And then how does it impact them once they realize, oh yeah, I do have this going for me? So how does that?
I actually give a personal example, and my personal example is this. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, in a middle-class community where my blackness, my race was affirmed all the time. I went to a magnet elementary school, then I went to a magnet high school, then I went to a 4-year research institution, then I went to another institution that was a smaller private institution for graduate school. And so even though I knew that racism existed, I was kind of in this bubble, right? I was in a black middle class bubble, and I was affirmed in every way. It wasn't until I moved to Northern Illinois with all of my class privilege. As a college professor, I moved because I was hired to be a college professor, teaching in multiple disciplines. I have degrees in sociology and psychology, and so I can teach in multiple disciplines. And so I got there, and there were certain events in which I was treated a certain way because of my race. And my initial response was, they must not know who I am. That I need to create a t-shirt or something and walk around with a little card with all of my credentials on this little card because they're treating me in this way. And it hit me, right? So here I am, a sociologist, teaching classes on race and privilege, and I talk about all the various forms of privilege. But it hit me in that moment, and I thought, my response to this is related to my class privilege, in which I never experienced real racism. I know, of course, racism exists, right? But in this bubble, you're kind of kept safe because of class. And so it changed the way I was able to teach the topic, right? So then I am not a victim, that I also have a leg up. And so we can make comparisons on the forms of privilege and then talk about the ways in which we are disadvantaged. So I kind of do it backwards, right? So how are we privileged? And then how are we disadvantaged? And what does that mean for other groups who might experience privileges or disadvantages based on various forms of oppression?
Now, your experience with your discovery of your privilege, how did that impact you in terms of empathy for people within your own race, other females, other women who you may not have been able to identify with before? Did that make sense?
Absolutely.
How did did it impact that interaction?
Absolutely.
With the next black woman who had not had the achievements that you have? Did it impact that, and if so, how?
It forced me to think about the commonality of experience.
Yes.
Right? So as humans, we all have the same basic needs. We all need to eat. We all need to love. We all need to have a sense of belonging. So we all have the same basic needs. For women, there's a commonality of experience regardless of race. And for black folk, there's a commonality of experience regardless of gender. And so it forced me to think about the commonality of experience and then relate to people on that level first. And I think in my classes, students always say, that they enjoy my classes because they're able to relate to me. And that, there is no hierarchy really in my class. Yes, I do the grading, but in terms of the experience that students have, I treat everyone with respect. And for me, that's the real goal, right? Because when we think about the way in which oppression operates, it's a lack of respect for another group related to their group membership.
Wow.
And so doing that forces people to, I hope, respect others, at least in my trainings and in my classes. They do that in my face.
Right. I love that approach. I love what you say about the commonality of experience and making that the priority, because so many times we see the difference and we start to do this instead of seeing the commonality of experience and embracing people. We naturally see the difference. Oh, I have this, she doesn't have that. I know this, he doesn't know that. So I'm better. And we come to this conclusion about this person. We start to devalue them. And we don't see their worth. And that's where so many social issues start.
Absolutely.
And with that, I want to address, we are in social turmoil right now.
Exactly.
And, of course, we have the Black Lives movement that's going, and there's so much controversy surrounding that movement. I'd like you to address that for us and discuss how diversity, inclusion, and the commonality of experience, how does all of that factor in with the Black Lives Matter movement?
Absolutely. I think the Black Lives Matter movement is a really powerful message. I think that the Black Lives Matter movement, however, is a reaction. When we think about diversity trainings, it is my belief, honestly, that that's a more proactive approach, right?
Definitely.
So then let's all get on the same page. So let's not just talk about racism and what racism is, but let's also talk about the way in which race is created and then maintained, and then what purpose does that serve? The way in which gender is created and maintained, and what purpose does that serve?
Right.
With diversity trainings, I'm able to walk into a room and kind of unpack some of the socialization that we have experienced. And again, it's very proactive. So even when you go out onto the streets, you're thinking about people in different ways. Unfortunately, a lot of the reactive groups right now are focused on racism, right? So police officers are racist. Well, it's not just that, because I don't tend to believe that all police officers are racist. In fact, I believe that police officers might act within racist constraints, right? That the institution itself is racist. And so these police officers are acting within constraints without even really being conscious of why they are behaving in the way that they're behaving. With diversity and inclusion trainings, we deal with the whys. As a sociologist, we're always concerned with patterns of behavior and why people are behaving in the way that they are. And so in these trainings, I really talk about the whys, so that when teachers are in their classrooms, police officers are on the streets, businessmen are interacting with other folks in their own communities, that they are forced to think about why and then be proactive themselves. To me, I believe that approach gives people agency. Because if I say police officers are racist and they can't help themselves, then I am really taking away the police officer's agency. Right? They can't help themselves. They're just going to behave in this way anyway. However, if I walk into a room and I say, okay, let's talk about the whys, and you have all of the agency to be an ally to each group, then that's, to me, that's empowerment, right? So I am giving people power and agency to make those decisions themselves.
I love that. And I love that the goal is empowerment, because now we're hearing so much anger. We hear retaliation. We hear hatred. We're hearing fatigue, just being tired, just being tired of being tired.
Right.
And that message is starting to overshadow the message of hope, empowerment, strength. Okay, what do we do? How do we make it better? And that's what we need to do, because at the end of the day, the United States of America is one of the most diverse countries in the world.
Absolutely.
So if we don't figure out how to get along,
right.
I mean, and I don't even want to just say coexist. We can't coexist. We've got to get along and build together.
We've got to be inclusive.
We've got to be inclusive. So, what do you want to be known for? What is the most powerful impact that you think that you can make in the cause of diversity and inclusion and being an anti-oppression trainer? What is the most powerful thing you could do?
I will tell you.
I love that smile.
when I first started doing this work, I would tell people I am content with being in the classroom. That's all I want to do. I want to go to work, teach my social classes. If I can touch a student a semester, I'm good with that, right? And I had some colleagues and friends who would say, no, what you do in the classroom needs to be more widespread, right? Because people aren't hearing this message. People aren't thinking about racism and sexism and heterosexism, they aren't thinking about it in the way in which you're able to communicate it. And so for a while I'd done some anti-diversity or some anti-oppression work with a former colleague of mine. And I was like, I'm just going to take a step back. I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to be a mom and go to work. And with every single time I tried to step back, something else was like, no, this is what you are supposed to do. And so for me, I feel as though I don't have to be known for anything. I don't need the accolades. I don't, recognition is nice, but that's not really my motivation, right? My motivation is encouraging people to have the appropriate conversation. One of the topics that I spend a great deal of time on in my trainings is how do we move beyond where we are? And I say, on the screen I have a slide that says we talk, we communicate. And then I have another, number 3 is talk in big, bold, block letters. And then number 4 is like engage in conversation. Number 5 is actively listening, which all means the same thing, right? That we should be engaging in this conversation. We should all be having the conversation. We shouldn't be afraid of it. Unfortunately, there are lots of folks, we just don't want to talk about race.
Right.
We don't want to talk about the ways in which people are disadvantaged. If we just ignore it, it'll go away. Yep. And that is absolutely false. We should be having these conversations. We should be having the conversations with our children. We should be having the conversations in the workplace. We should be having the conversations in our churches, because the church is the most segregated place ever. On Sunday mornings, everybody goes to church with people who look just like them, sadly. And so we should be having the appropriate conversation to move forward. We shouldn't just be focusing on things like racism, because unfortunately, again, that forces us to kind of point the finger. Well, that person is racist. But if we're having the real conversation, what does racism actually look like? How are institutions using racism? And then how are people who are within those institutions kind of forced to just kind of abide by the rules, right? And so then it becomes perpetuated, not on purpose, not because people are bad, not because people are ill-meaning, but because they are operating within the constraints of the institution.
Definitely. And when you're forced, I think what people are missing too is when you're forced to operate within the constraints of the institution, you perpetuate racism or sexism or whatever it is against your own people.
Absolutely.
Because your allegiance, so to speak, is to the company or the person who signs your check, not to your sister or your brother. And it's a built-in divide and conquer mechanism.
Absolutely.
If I attack your ability to provide for your children, then you're going to turn on me, and we're going to compete and fight each other. And once we start doing that as a unit, as black people, as women, or all of our common experiences, once you divide us, we have no voice, we have no power.
And we're not able to focus on what's actually happening at the top. Right? Because oppression works in a way that the people at the bottom are focused on the other people at the bottom.
Exactly.
Right.
That's the message.
Yep. And so, again, it strips people of agency, right? Definitely. So the people at the bottom are fighting over scraps because they perceive themselves to lack agency. And again, my goal really is to encourage people to recognize their own agency. And sometimes that agency just looks like, if I'm in a room where people are engaging in racist comments or sexist comments or comments about immigrants or comments about people who don't practice Christianity, Muslims, people who are Buddhists, people who are atheists, right? If I'm in a room and people are talking about those group members, sometimes agency just looks like, wait, no, I am not going to let you say that about that group, right? That's powerful. That means that I have just encouraged someone else to think differently or to really think about, be critical about what they're saying and why they believe it.
Yeah, and what sometimes for me, what I'll do is I'll ask a question because they'll make a statement about another group, and I'll say, how many Muslims, I'm a Christian, okay? So
Mhm.
you make a statement about a Muslim. How many Muslims do you actually know?
Right.
Have you ever had that discussion? So, okay, I want you to validate your statement that you just made,
Mhm.
and they can't.
Absolutely.
They absolutely cannot. They have no clue. It's kind of just off the cuff remarks
Mhm.
that are unfounded, and we simply cannot
Just
do that to each
stereotypes.
other. Yeah,
Right.
just stereotypes.
There's a one of my favorite theories in sociology is called the contact hypothesis.
Mhm.
And the contact hypothesis basically suggests that the more we come into contact with people who we perceive to not be like us,
Mhm.
the more we realize that everybody is like us.
Exactly.
You know, and so again, that is to me some empowerment,
Yes.
right? That I can see a commonality of lived experience. Now, it is true, of course, that with something like race, and if we're saying this now, even though race itself is not a biological fact, um, race has real consequences, and one of those consequences, unfortunately, is racism. So racism is real.
Mhm.
And so the lived experiences of black folk and Hispanic folk and Native American folk and Muslim folk,
Mhm.
those experiences are definitely real, but it's related to forms of discrimination, institutional discrimination that exists.
Okay. So
That was a whole lot there.
that was a lot, and I'm gonna pull a lot of quotes out of that when I go back and watch
Mhm.
this. Okay, pretend that the world, the audience, is your classroom.
Okay.
Give us homework, Professor.
Absolutely.
Yes.
My homework is my homework for the world is always be critical about the way in which we are thinking about other people. Always be critical of our own selves. Not critical of them, but really critical of our own selves, our own thought processes, right? So, why is it that I believe this about this individual? Why is it that I take this individual out of the group? So, an example of this, my sister is an opera singer, and she went on a trip one day for a week, I think, and she was with some folks, and one of the people with on the trip said to her, "You are like the whitest black girl I know. You're not like all the other black girls." Right, and that's something that's frequently said. We hear that all the time,
Yeah.
and since we hear it all the time, then that probably means we are representative of the black experience, right?
Yep.
But I said to my sister, "Well, you should have asked her. What do you think black people are like? You know how and why? Is it related to media?
Hmm.
You know, so again." I encourage people to really be critical of our own thought patterns. And even as we're critical, second homework assignment would be to actually get to know someone who you perceive to not be like you. And then don't try to make allowances. Don't say, well, yeah, this person and I can get along because they're more like me than they are like the rest of the group. But instead, kind of perceive that person as representative of the group. Does that make sense?
Yep. Sure does.
Because if I do that, then my expectations of the group is up here. Rather than the rest of the group is down here, this person is an outlier. Because most of the time it's not true. The people that we come into contact with are probably not outliers.
Wow. That's a great homework assignment. Okay. So tell us, how do we follow you? How do we get in touch with you? How do we book you for trainings, for seminars? How do we keep in contact with you?
Absolutely. So I'm on Facebook.
Okay.
I'm also on Twitter. And my email address, I'll give you my email address, which is probably the easiest way to do it. My email address is joladapo1@gmail.com. Right now, that's where all of my booking is going. That's the easiest way to contact me.
Okay. So is there anything else that you want to leave with us?
I don't think so.
You don't think
It's been
so?
fun.
Yeah, thank you so much. I enjoyed this so much, and I think that we need this.
Absolutely.
We need more conversations about this.
Absolutely.